Yeah.
Good afternoon. The committee will now resume, and I welcome representatives from the Department of Defence and the Australian War Memorial. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or a minister. This resolution, however, does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. Before we move to opening statements, could I please ask the witnesses at the table today to please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today.
Thank you, Senator. Petrina Cole, Assistant Secretary, Work Health and Safety from the Department of Defence.
Thanks, Ms Cole.
Good afternoon, Senator. Rear Admiral Richard Boulton, Deputy Chief of Personnel.
Thank you, Rear Admiral.
Good afternoon, Chair. Matt Anderson, Director of the Australian War Memorial.
Thank you, Mr.
Brian Dawson, Assistant Director, National Collection, Australian War Memorial.
Thank you, Mr. Dawson.
And Nick Fletcher, Head of Military Heraldry and Technology at the Australian War Memorial.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Would any or all of the witnesses like to make an opening statement?
Senator, Defence would like to make a short opening statement.
Please go ahead, Rear Admiral.
Good afternoon, Senators. May I begin by highlighting the important contribution to the security of our nation of all ADF personnel and to our veterans for their past service. Of course, this commitment of our ADF people is only possible through the support and encouragement of families, friends and the broader Australian community. Service in the Australian Defence Force is a serious commitment. It is also one of the most exciting, rewarding and satisfying careers any Australian could aspire to. It might be useful to reflect on the uniqueness of ADF service before we discuss how that service is rewarded and recognised under the current systems. Australian Defence Force personnel are required to follow lawful orders and execute the ADF mission despite personal fear or danger. What defines the military profession is not just the preparedness to use lethal force in circumstances other than in self-defence, but also a willingness to put service before self as a part of that military duty. Many of us who are providing evidence before the committee today or have provided earlier written submissions and may be watching on the telecast have lost friends and colleagues across the full spectrum of military service. Defence continues to work with government and DVA to ensure support is available to those that need it. The topic of honours and awards always attracts significant attention across the ADF and the veteran communities. The symbols we wear on our uniforms are a visual record of service, achievement and recognition. These symbols inevitably become part of an individual's identity. Defence is committed to upholding the integrity of the Australian honours system. An example of this commitment is the importance we place on the confidentiality of the nomination and decision-making processes. We also understand the negative consequences that can result when this fundamental principle of the system is breached. Recognition of individuals, by its very nature, is an emotive and often complex issue. Some individuals are not inclined to seek recognition for their service. Others may be dissatisfied with the level of honour that might be bestowed upon them. For others, being recognised by colleagues or their chain of command is a significant career achievement which is celebrated. The message here is that the value placed on honours awards is a deeply individual matter. Defence's recognition system is constantly adapting to the changing character of our environment. This evolution across conflicts has been highlighted in the submission by my colleagues to the right from the Australian War Memorial. An important element of the honours, awards and recognition systems is the flexibility to appropriately recognise the achievements of our people across the full spectrum of activities that are needed by Defence to deliver our capabilities at the right places and at the right times. This week, Government announced the institution of a new medal for operational service in the Indo-Pacific region, which will result in recognition for approximately 15,000 serving and former Australian Defence Force personnel. Outside of the formal honours system, the Australian Defence Force operates a sophisticated reward system that comprises commendations, badges, career progression through promotion, additional education and training opportunities, and performance-based employment opportunities. Many of these initiatives are captured in our Defence Employee Value Proposition Framework, which codifies the benefits, opportunities and conditions of working at Defence. During 2024, Defence processed over 17,700 applications resulting in the award of over 37,700 medals, clasps, citations and badges to current serving ADF personnel, veterans and families. 161 honours and decorations for ADF personnel were announced in the Australia Day and the King's Birthday Honours lists, and in excess of 1,900 commendations of various levels were awarded to Defence personnel. Additionally, Defence is currently undertaking 49 historical honours assessments. This consists of a formal review where an individual service may merit medallic recognition. Independent of Defence sits the Defence Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal. Through the tribunal, an individual may apply for a review of Defence's decision regarding their eligibility for a Defence Honour, Defence Award or a foreign award. The tribunal is the only one of its kind that exists across the Commonwealth countries that affords military members, veterans and their families the opportunity for independent review of Defence military awards. We appreciate the work of the tribunal, however we also assess that the relatively low numbers of appeals that it receives annually is a reflection of the hard work and professionalism of the many people who contribute to the Defence Honours and Awards ecosystem. We welcome the opportunity presented by this inquiry to ensure the Defence Honours and Awards system is contemporary and meeting the needs and expectations of the Australian Defence Force community. Thank you, Senators.
Thank you, Rear Admiral Boulton. Mr Anderson, did you have an opening statement?
No, we don't, Senator.
All right, thank you. We'll proceed directly to questions then. And Senator Roberts, would you like to lead off?
Certainly, Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you all for appearing today and thank you for your service in the Defence Forces. Why should I believe you, Mr Boulton?
Senator, in the Afghanistan campaign, more than 39,000 ADF members deployed. During that campaign, we assigned over 107,000 operational medals and the honours and decorations of 569. Some of the people that were recognised in the conspicuous honours and awards represent the bravest, most dedicated Australians that you will ever meet. I think the fact that we have a system that recognises the extraordinary achievements of those Australians is a credit to the organisation. But as the committee is finding, this is a vexing issue. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, identifying and highlighting people for extraordinary achievements is always a divisive issue.
So, did you watch or were you involved in listening to the first session today?
Yes, Senator.
What feelings did you find in the men there? Outstanding men, all four of them.
I did watch that session, Senator. I thought it was very emotional. I think it demonstrates the complexities of the issue that this inquiry is looking at. It shows how different people perceive awards in different ways. It highlights the best of our character and it challenges us to think about who we are as an organisation and who we're recognising.
With due respect, I didn't find that very reassuring. I found it a bunch of platitudes. So I asked you what the men were feeling.
Could you repeat that question, please, Senator?
What were the men feeling? They were outstanding people, in my opinion.
What were the men feeling?
Yeah.
I think some of them were feeling frustration. I think some of them were feeling pride to have been part of a special unit that was doing special things for Australia. I think there's a range of emotions, but I couldn't offer you what each of those individuals was thinking, Senator.
Some of the feelings that came through were certainly pride in the armed forces and their role in the armed forces, deep disappointment, deep concern with where the Defence Forces are going, very deep concern. And we've heard that from time after time from veterans and currently serving people. They said their needs were an apology. They feel seriously aggrieved, redemptive justice. They want a simple need to be heard. I've heard that time and time again from enlisted people and from veterans. Fairness, objectivity, they're just being fair dinkum. They want people to be fair dinkum. And they see a big loss of integrity in the Defence Forces with regard to this issue. And they also see it as one member put it, the DNA of Australian soldiers. And the recognition system, they all mentioned that morale is suffering. We've heard that time and time again from currently serving people and people who have veterans. To me, that's a very big concern because that's the DNA of Australian soldiers, the morale, the mateship, and that they don't trust the senior leadership anymore. Are you aware of that?
Senator, I'm aware that there's a number of organisations that have presented today, and there's a range of perspectives that are held by all of those. And I respectfully suggest that it demonstrates the complexity of the issues that we're dealing with. For every historic award nomination that might be considered by Defence or by the Tribunal, you're going to have many, many different perspectives on that. Some who were awarded an award back in history will say that others being opened up to that award devalues the award that they were given. Others will celebrate the fact that they've had a review of their service and they might be presented an award. So it's a range of emotions. It's a very hard one to put into a narrow container.
It is when you're managing a system with variable inputs, and it's highly variable itself, you try to minimise the variation, get it more standardised. This defence award system seems to be all over the place. It's controlled by the defence organisation itself. It's not seen as objective, it's not seen as transparent, it's not seen as fair. The figures themselves show that there's a disproportionately higher awarding of awards to the senior brass.
I'm sorry, Senator, is that a question?
Do you see the inconsistencies that people are seeing? They're blatant.
Senator, it's a complex system, and if the committee would like me to run through how Defence manages the nomination process for these awards, I'd be happy to do that. There are checks and balances in the system. I'm not suggesting that the system is perfect. I don't think any system is perfect, and we're open to discussing improvements to the system.
Could we, one of the submissions, submission 21, and I think this was done in confidence, which is another problem, because we've heard from witnesses and submissions that they don't believe the Defence Department will not be vindictive, will punish them. So that's an indictment for a start, that your own people don't trust you. In the matter of Gilbert, I don't know the date. Hang on, here it is. March 2019. Gilbert and the Department of Defence and DHAT. Defence said that inaction was to be physically present in a specific action involving direct conflict between opposing forces. In the same matter, the Defence Honours and Awards Appeal Tribunal defined inaction to mean involving armed conflict in close proximity to or under the fire of an adversary. Submission 21 draws up the table. DHAT in Gilbert said involving, the definition of inaction is involving armed conflict in close proximity to or under the fire of an adversary. Defence, in the same case, physically present in a specific action involving direct conflict between opposing forces. That's quite clear. Your own position and DHAT's own position. Then, Commander of the Defence Forces, former Commander, the definition of inaction that I applied is consistent with that which has been standing for some time, as do commanders. Sorry, this was the current CDF. And certainly in General Campbell's case, I believe he spent more than 100 days in Afghanistan as part of his command role in an area that was classified as a warlike zone. Not even close to the other two that Defence and DHAT said. He was, as part of his duties, rotating through the places where Australian soldiers and others were located, experiencing the same threats as they had in those locations. Again, not even close to being under fire. The definition I applied, this is the current CDF, is the same as what had been applied by my predecessors and over, I think, 8 commanders prior to General Campbell who had been nominated for his Distinguished Service Cross. It was an individual who is operating in an area where it is a warlike zone and there are threats from hostile forces. That's not inaction. How do you explain that to men and women in the armed forces? You've got one rule that DHAT's saying, similar rule that Defence is saying. The CDF says no. And he says, I'm just applying the rules, as Mr. Fortune said, I think, this morning. These rules have been changed to justify the granting of awards amongst the top brass. That's clear. How do you justify that?
That's a large statement to justify it, Senator, but I can pull that apart if you like.
Sure,
and
go.
have a go at it. I'm not aware of, I don't have the evidence in front of me for Gilbert that you refer to, but I do have the Gilbert decision in front of me. And parts of what you have just relayed to the committee, I would agree with. However, the decision goes on to state that inaction was physically present in a specific action up until the date of 1991 when the new awards were taken. So the issue that we have here, and I think this has been explained a number of times to the Senate and is certainly on the Hansard, is that the term inaction is not defined in the metals regulations. Defence has had some interpretations of it which has satisfied the award givers for the awards over many years.
So my understanding is that General Campbell was awarded his DSC on the last day in which the old definitions applied. Is that correct?
Senator,
And he contravened those.
I don't think it was the last day, but I'm quite happy to run you through the timeline of that decision-making process,
Yes,
if that would help. I think it's on the Senate Hansard records previously. On the 23rd of January 1991, the letters patent for the Distinguished Service Decorations was signed by the Sovereign, and it's under the Distinguished Service Decorations that General Campbell was given his award.
What date was he given his award?
General Campbell was given his award on the Queen's Birthday 2012 Honours List on the 11th of June 2012.
When was his application made?
Senator, it's a matter of the Hansard record that the citation was commenced drafting about I think it was over halfway through his tenure when he was in theatre. It certainly wasn't finalised until he finished that appointment.
So was he considered for, and was the decision made to give him a DSC under the old definition of inaction? Because that's my understanding.
Senator, I have the timeline here. It's on the Hansard record. I'm happy to work through it again if you'd like me to. We move on to...
Could you put it in writing to us, please?
Would you like me to take it on notice, Senator?
Yes, please.
Certainly.
So my question is, was General Campbell awarded, the decision to award him a DSC, was that taken during the period when the old definition of inaction applied?
I'll take it on notice, Senator. Thank you.
You don't know?
Well, you just asked me to take it on notice.
Yes, but I'm talking about taking on notice the whole timeline.
Senator, would it help if I walk through the timeline?
If you have the timeline in front of you, let's just step through that quickly now. I think that would satisfy you, wouldn't it, Senator Roberts? Please go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So I explained that the letters patent was signed in 1991. In 2007, the Chiefs of Service Committee agreed that the term inaction in a military context is the engagement between opposing forces. A member must be physically in a situation involving direct conflict between opposing forces to be determined in action. So I would suggest that the Chiefs of Service Committee definition of inaction came about from 2007. In 2009...
What date?
4th of April 2007. On the 3rd of December 2009, the then Chief of the Defence Force directed the Vice Chief of the Defence Force through the Assistant Secretary Personnel Support Services to facilitate having the words of the regulations amended. On the 14th of January 2011, Major General Campbell assumed his command. In August 2011, an award narrative was drafted for his command. On the 29th of September 2011, operational nominations to the Queen's Birthday 2012 Honours List were considered by a Joint Operations Command and Honours Board. In October 2011, operational nominations to the Queen's Birthday 2012 Honours List were considered by the Joint Operations Command Review Board. Nominations endorsed by the Chief of Operations and submitted to the Director of Honours and Awards. On the 17th of January 2012, Major General Campbell relinquished his command of Joint Task Force 633. On the 30th of January 2012, the Queen's Birthday 2012 Honours List brief to the Chief of the Defence Force was signed by the Acting Director General Base and Customer Support Services. On the 10th of February 2012, ministerial submission was signed by by General David Hurley, Chief of the Defence Force, referring to warlike service in the Middle East area of operations. On the 16th of February 2012, ministerial submission was signed by Senator the Honourable David Feeney. Senator Feeney submits the defence nominations to the Queen's Birthday 2012 Honours List to the Governor-General, referring to operational awards in respect to ongoing warlike operations in the Middle East area of operations.
Thank you. A lot of those dates are accompanied by titles that I don't understand. So could we cut to the chase, please? And could you tell me the date on which General Campbell was nominated for the DSC and the date on which the definition of inaction was softened to warlike? And please, I'm not the only one having trouble.
No. So on the 3rd of December 2009, the Chief of Defence Force directed the Vice Chief of the Defence Force through Assistant Secretary to facilitate having the words of the regulations amended. And then on the 28th of August 2011, an award narrative was drafted by the Deputy Commander.
If I could just interject, from my understanding, this is from your submission, the formal gazetting of the changes to the Distinguished Service Decorations regulations took place on the 22nd of February 2012, which substituted the phrase "in warlike operations" for the phrase "in action."
What was that date again, Chair?
22nd of February 2012. So after General Campbell's service as COJTF 633 had concluded. That's on page 16 of the Defence submission. Please correct me.
That's correct.
Rear Admiral Boulton or Ms. Cole if I'm wrong. So from what I understand, I think this is your line of questioning, Senator Roberts. The changes, the change from inaction to in warlike operations took place subsequent to General Campbell's nomination for the award.
That's exactly it. And it occurred, according to DHAT again, involving armed conflict. Inaction is defined by involving armed conflict in close proximity to or under the fire of an adversary. Defence in Gilbert, defence said physically present in a specific action involving direct conflict between opposing forces. And the current CDF in Senate estimates said that the definition of inaction that he applied is consistent with what had been standing for some time as to commanders. Softened, warlike, not inaction. So General Campbell was nominated under the L system and was awarded under the L system, but it wasn't. That was prior to the definition changing.
Sorry.
That means to me and to a lot of people in this room that General Campbell was wrongly given that Distinguished Service Cross.
Senator, I might respond by saying the term in action is not defined in the medals regulations. When the gallantry decorations and the Distinguished Service decorations were instituted in 1991, the term in action was viewed as bearing an ordinary meaning of the context as an engagement between opposing forces. And I think
that means under fire.
Sorry, Senator, I think this might be a discussion that we have later in the hour because of the changing nature of warfare, how we've been working to make sure that our honours and awards system is appropriate, recognises the people for the changing nature of warfare. I would be very happy to talk about examples.
Nice try. I don't buy that at all. Don't buy it at all. We have not seen a significant change of warfare or engagement in the time between his nomination and his receiving the award. There wasn't a massive change in warfare in that time.
Senator, as I gave in previous evidence, we took that definition in Gilbert back in 1991 as being what was the intent of the definition then. There's in the same document that that evidence is pulled from, it talks that from as early as 2003, defence leaders were expanding the definition of inaction.
I might, if I could, I might just assist.
They were expanding it without being gazetted?
As I said, Senator, the term inaction is not defined in the medals regulations.
So it's up to the senior brass to have one definition for them and another definition for others.
Senator, I'm not aware that a definition has ever been narrowed down to a single group of individuals. I understand that it applies to all individuals of any rank of the regulations as they apply to the award they've been nominated for.
Well, I'll read what the current CDF said in Senate estimates again. The definition of inaction that I applied, is consistent with that which had been standing for some time, as do commanders. And certainly in General Campbell's case, I believe he spent more than 100 days in Afghanistan. That's not inaction. As part of his command role in an area that was classified as a warlike zone. That's it. He was, as part of his duties, rotating through the places where Australian soldiers and others were located, experiencing the same threats as they had in those locations. He didn't come under fire.
Senator, the definitions under the regulations don't refer to being under fire. Is the notion that it's small arms fire, is it large fire, is it another threat? I'm not aware of the definition you're referring to.
A lot of people are watching this.
I just point out, Senator Roberts, I mean, there are a number of commanders of JTF 633 prior to General Campbell who were also awarded the DSC, I think going back to 2004, well before.
And that was the point Mr. Fletcher mentioned.
Yeah, no, I take that point, but I think it's, perhaps rather than focusing on one individual, we might, it's obviously a broader question of interpretation.
Mr. Fortune was making, that the senior brass have a different rule.
No, I understand.
That's the point many witnesses have been making. So, Mr. Boulton, what have you learned today from these outstanding people who have come before us?
Senator, we've learnt that it's a complex issue, honours and awards. It's certainly a command responsibility for senior leaders to recognise the achievements of their personnel as much as it is a command and leadership responsibility to provide direction to subordinates to make sure that they're prepared for the role. We don't deny that. Where the complexities are coming up in this situation is, nominations not being raised at the time. You'll perhaps hear later on in the day from the tribunal about the complexities involved in dealing with historic claims for awards and nominations. So we would have the position that, that there's a lot of good in the Defence Honours and Awards system. It's a complex system. It's dealt with many, many conflicts over many, many years, and we will continue to refine the Defence Honours and Awards system so that it remains appropriate and applicable and recognises our people because they deserve it.
A key word that came up today was trust and the lack of it. How can you have trust in a system that's not transparent? We were told it's opaque by several people. A system that rewards, almost as part of a remuneration package, the senior brass, so they get it for their furtherance of their career. And yet the lower ranks get various degrading of their nominations.
Senator, inviting a comment?
Yes.
Yes. Senator, it is a confidential process, and Defence treats the confidentiality of our honours and awards process very, very seriously, as does the Australian Honours and Awards system treat the confidentiality of their assessments and their decisions regarding broader honours and awards under the Australian system. The confidentiality is there to protect the confidences of the decision making. It's there to protect the feelings of the people who may or might not be awarded a defence honour or an award. It's no different to the way that it's managed under the Australian honours system. In fact, in some ways, we have more checks and balances in place through our internal mechanisms.
Where does DHAT fit within the defence? Within defence?
The tribunal?
Yes.
The tribunal is independent of defence. It's established under its own regulations. It can take reviewable decisions from defence, apply an independent lens of that, and it can be tasked by the minister. They act completely independent of the department. We provide a funding line to them for their budget through our Defence Legal. We don't ask how they use their budget. We don't control any of their actions.
So Defence provides the budget?
It comes from a defence budget line, but once it's signed across to them, that's theirs. It's completely independent, Senator.
Just Senator Roberts, in the interest of time, I'd like to rotate the call if possible.
That's fine.
All right.
Oh,
Thank
just one more thing.
you. Okay.
What are your people's needs regarding the defence award system? What are people needing?
People need a system they can trust and a system that rewards the remarkable performances of some of the best Australians that we have. We ask our people to do dangerous, challenging things almost every single day in various parts of the world. When they go above and beyond, they deserve the recognition so that they feel that they are being rewarded for their service.
So why aren't enlisted people getting that? Their needs are not being met. They have no trust and they're not getting rewarded. It's being degraded.
Then we'll just take that one as a comment, Senator
Yes, it will.
Roberts, unless you wish to respond, Rear Admiral, and we will rotate the call to Senator Ciccone.
Senator, I may...
If you wish to, yeah. And then we'll move
I may
the
wish to respond to that, Chair. I think, Senator, if you turn to Annex Charlie of the Defence submission, you'll see that there's quite a clear breakdown of awards for the Afghan theatre. Most people that are listening in today would be very aware of the Victoria Cross and the Gallantry Awards. If I go to the Victoria Cross, 4 out of 4 Victoria Crosses were given to corporals or privates, 100%. If I turn to the Star of Gallantry, 6 of 6 Stars of Gallantries were awarded to sergeants and privates. If I go on to the Medal of Gallantry, 35 were awarded. None of those were awarded to an officer above the rank of Major. So if I turn to the Distinguished Service Awards, there is no evidence that more awards have been given to senior officers. In fact, I'm looking at the totals here, and 33 out of 58, that's 58% of the DSCs were awarded to people below the rank of senior officer. So what I think the figures are showing us in that annex is the soldiers who are going out and doing the most dangerous, the most challenging tasks are being rewarded through a combination of both the Distinguished Service Awards, but almost entirely the Gallantry Awards, which they truly deserve.
Well, the Gallantry Award, you wouldn't expect a desk jockey to be in line for that, would you?
I wouldn't expect a desk jockey, as you put it, to be awarded for a Gallantry Award, no. But I think there's appropriate awards for appropriate service. I would also highlight, Senator, that 33 of the 58 Distinguished Service Crosses were awarded during the Afghanistan campaign. Of those, only 25 were awarded to senior officers. The vast majority are awarded to junior officers and a sergeant.
58.
25 out of 58.
We're going to rotate the call because we're going to run out of time for these.
Thank you, Senator.
So, Senator Ciccone.
Thanks, Chair. I've only got really 2 questions. Could you just explain the difference between the previous service medal framework that linked the nature of service with medallic recognition, being the the Australian Service Medal and the Australian Active Service Medal, and the current model, which does not, being the Australian Operational Service Medal?
Certainly, Senator. Defence and previous governments have long held the view that the natures of service, the conditions of service and the medallic recognition should be considered as completely separate aspects in terms of classifications. The nature of service of an operation, which I think is the gist of your question, expresses the extent of which ADF personnel deployed on an authorised military operation, including those of our people that are on third country deployments with other nations, are exposed to the risk of harm as a consequence of executing their missions and tasks. There's 3 natures of service definitions. We have warlike, non-warlike and peacetime. Separate to that, the Defence Honours and Awards Directorate, once an operation is instigated, will look at the operation and determine separately whether it is warlike or non-warlike, which in the past has led to specific medal entitlements. Recently, Defence has moved to an Australian Operational Service Medal, which can be awarded for both warlike and non-warlike operations.
And who determines the nature of service?
The nature of service determination is developed within military strategic commitments in the Australian Defence Force headquarters. A recommendation is passed by the CDF across to the Minister for a determination on warlike and non-warlike operations.
Okay, thanks. Look, I'll just leave it there. We'll chase a bit later on. Any other information? Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Fawcett.
Yeah, thank you. Can I come to page 9 of your submission? You say currently the nominating chain of command is informed when a nomination is not progressed or considered for a different level of award. We had evidence this morning that a nominator in a chain of command put in a nomination for a enlisted service person for gallantry, went up through the chain of command. It was changed not only level but stream without informing the chain of command, and then went forward, and sometime later the members advised that he was nominated for an award that was not for gallantry and it was at a lower level. Is your statement here a response to that or similar incidents, or do you maintain that this is how the system always works?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I couldn't say that the system has always worked in that way. I would say that we are working hard to constantly improve the system. The guidance that is provided to the services and the Headquarters Joint Operations Command is that when a nomination is raised and pushed up the chain of command, it proceeds to a Defence Honours and Awards Board. There's a couple of boards. The primary ones are within Joint Operations Command. The services and the Joint Capabilities Group have their own, but they're very similar. Once a board receives a nomination, it's been through a initiating and a recommending officer. If the board considers the awards and has either feedback for the nominating officer that the narrative might need to be strengthened in some ways because it doesn't quite match the criteria of the award, if the board has makes the assessment that the narrative that's been provided to them should be a higher or a lower award, then the direction that we have is that they should go back to the nominating officer and pass that down to them so that they can make the necessary corrections.
I'm conscious that is in your submission. What I'm seeking to understand here is a few details. So if a nominator fills out a form, says this is for gallantry and this is what happened, does the board at the end of the process of review see that original nomination with additional comments, recommendations, etc., or do they see a modified version that is the product of the review of the chain of command?
Senator, at present they would see the final version. They would not see the iterations throughout the drafting of the nomination.
Okay, so the evidence the committee received this morning was that the chain of command not only changed the text, not only changed the stream, not only changed the level, but also at a certain level removed the nominator's name and inserted their own name so that any feedback would not go back to the original nominator. Is that an acceptable practice?
Senator, I'm not aware of that individual case, but normally the officer who raises a nomination will sign the nomination, send it up to an approving officer, an approving officer will sign it. I think there is possibilities that nominations could be changed as they go higher in the system. There are different levels of command through Defence, within Special Operations. They had their team on the ground in Afghanistan. They had National Command. They had Special Operations Commanders who were a part of the HQ JOC Honours and Reviews Board. But look, I see where your question is going, and I think there's certainly room there to have some traceability within the nomination process so that people at those boards could see where it's been changed along the way.
Is it permissible for a reviewing officer in the chain of command to not just perhaps change the text or the level, but actually to change the stream?
When
from gallantry, for example, to service?
So, Senator, when a significant change like that is made, we would desire for the board to pass that feedback back down the chain to the nominating officer.
But sorry, how does the board become aware of it if it's done by somebody in the chain of
command?
The board
won't, Senator, and that's why I agree with you that it might not be a bad idea to have that traceability within the nomination system. We're open to discussing that.
So at the moment, is there any sanction on somebody in the chain of command who takes it upon themselves to not only change the text and the level, but even the stream when they were not present? It's completely contrary to what the initial nominator was putting forward, or is that just an unfortunate incident that Defence lets go?
Senator, I have no knowledge of the individual case that...
Did you look at the evidence? You said you were here this morning or monitoring.
Yes.
Did you read the submissions before?
I have read the submissions. I don't recall the detail of every single submission, but I have read them. But, you know, in that particular case, I'm not aware of sanctions that would occur, but in the same way, I'm not aware of the motivation for why it was changed. I would need to understand more about that case.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The submission also says that Defence constantly evolves the system so it's fit for purpose. At the moment, have you prepared any recommendations to the Minister or to the Government for changes that you believe should occur, or at the moment do you think it is fit for purpose?
We make some comments in our submission about some potential improvements to the Honours and Awards process and some of the review mechanisms that are available. We think in totality, I mean, the sheer numbers that we process every year and the small number of referrals to the tribunal would indicate that there's a large number of people that are happy with the processes. I'm not saying it's perfect.
Mm-hmm. Can I just come to a couple of specific issues? There's been discussion by a number of witnesses today around recognition for people who've been wounded in action. Is that something that Defence is actively considering, has considered and rejected, or would you like to comment on that?
I could make a brief comment on that because I understand that it's under consideration by government at the moment, but I think we certainly acknowledge the service and the sacrifice of ADF members. We understand the hurt, the emotions that are out there when one of our people is killed or injured, suffers damage as a result of their service. We all feel that. We all have colleagues that have been hurt in the service. I think the issues raised by the tribunals work in that space certainly very complex. They involve a lot of considerations over the wearing of awards, the recognition of people. Like every other matter that we've spoken about today, there'll be a range of opinions that I'm sure the government will need to consider across the defence community, the veteran community and the families that are advocating for these things.
Sure. Your submission talks about the fact that Defence may consider where you have a foreign national who's attached or embedded with our forces as to whether they are given essentially an honorary award or some recognition for what they have done. Can I flip that round the other way? What instructions are given to our commanders about ADF personnel who may be in theatre but not as part of the ADF's deployed force. So we had one witness this morning who was in a theatre where the ADF wasn't, and I'm not, there was obviously a dissatisfaction there about the fact that his service is not recognised by the Australian system, even though he was there at the instructions and orders of the ADF, but with another force. But likewise, we have, for example, in Afghanistan or Iraq, we had Defence Force members who were defence attachés with DFAT, in this case another government agency, and normally when they're posted to London or Washington, they're told they'll go and be under DFAT's conditions of service, which is great for accommodation support and, you know, paying your bills, whatever. But if they're in theatre and they're engaging on a regular basis with other ADF elements, what responsibility does the ADF have to make sure that that person is suitably recognised for their service, you know, working alongside in the same convoys, facing IEDs with other members of the ADF? But as I understand it, there is no medallic recognition for the fact that they spent a year or 2 years in theatre in the middle of a conflict.
So, Senator, thanks for the question. There's two elements to that. One is the third country deployments, which we referred to earlier, where there are arrangements in place where if an Australian officer, soldier is, for all intents and purposes, loaned to another nation's unit, there are certain conditions put upon that deployment. It's certainly formally recorded, and there are mechanisms where some recognition can be made for it, and those individuals, we can certainly reach out and provide those mechanisms for them where an assessment can be done. In terms of non-Australian Defence Force personnel who might be serving in the same areas where our people are, there is an intelligence medal. It's available to the individuals within 10 national intelligence community organisations. It's not available to Australian uniformed personnel, and it's considered a meritorious award.
Mm-hmm. So my question, though, is what is the obligation on ADF commanders? Because I am aware of some individuals who have gone into theatre, for example, on counter-IED task forces, etc. Their parent unit is a logistics unit, but they are sent in to do trials and test and evaluation, etc. And yet the people in theatre don't see any responsibility for them except perhaps to protect them, and the people at home, they're considered to be an administrative unit, not a field unit. And so sometimes those individuals slip through the cracks. The DA, DFAT aren't going to nominate them for a defence award, and yet they're an ADF member, posted by the ADF, just happens to be with DFAT, but in theatre. Even people like ISIS who deploy with the ADF, they don't have a chain of command there with them.
ISIS, I think you mean.
Pardon?
You said ISIS, didn't you? Not
Yeah,
ISIS. I think you said ISIS, but I
Okay,
think you mean ISIS. So
let's say ISIS.
I thought you meant the good guys.
I'd be concerned if you had ISIS with you. But ISIS don't have a chain of command there with them. So does the ADF, do you convey to your commanders that they have an obligation to say, hey, who's here on Team Australia, that they don't have other people to witness or chain of command to recommend? And if they're working above and beyond what's expected, what role does the ADF see in terms of saying, hey, we're going to reach into that other person's nomination, or we're going to put through our chain of command a recommendation that a department to department level, you know, nominations are made?
Senator, that's quite a complex question. For the defence attachés, there are long-standing protocols because of the diplomatic nature of the position that they hold. I can provide you further advice on that on notice. In terms of other government agencies that might be assisting us in theatre, once again, a complex question. The commander in a location might not necessarily have full awareness of everybody outside of his direct command arrangements. But once again, there are procedures to look at that, and I'd certainly be happy to take that one on notice and get you some further advice.
If you could, because I'm aware that quite often they are actually considered to be part of the formed force, but things like unit citations, etc., Defence doesn't initiate a recommendation for that person to receive those awards, whereas in actual fact they are essentially on the nominal roll for that deployed force there. So there's areas where I think Defence could actually be more proactive for some of those outliers.
I understand the question, Senator, and we'll get some answers on that.
And particularly, sorry, Chair, just on the last one for the DAs, I understand completely if it's Washington or London or somewhere like that, but if they are coming under fire, exposed to IEDs, in day-to-day liaison with the force elements who are there, and they're an ADF member, if our current protocols say that they get no recognition for their service over months or a year in theatre, then I think the protocols should change.
We'll take that on notice. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
I just had a question from the Australian War Memorial, if I could, Mr. Anderson. I just noticed in your submission you made an interesting point that the Conspicuous Service Awards were explicitly created to reward performance in non-warlike situations, and the Distinguished Service Awards originally was to recognise command and leadership in action or on warlike operations. But because of that change in 2012, you comment that I guess a confusion or lack of certainty regarding the purpose of the DSC has arisen. Wouldn't mind if you just elaborate on that, given your, I guess, deep base of historical and corporate knowledge about the evolution of the award system, because that does seem to be at the heart of some of the discussions today, is a confusion about the purpose of the DSC and, roughly speaking, which category of people should be eligible for it or not.
Well, thank you, Chair. And back to thank you for the inquiry too, but for us at the Australian War Memorial, our mission is to lead the nation's commemoration and understanding of the Australian experience of war and the telling of the stories of those that we've placed in harm's way. And this often comes up because we are both a memorial, a museum and an archive. We often get requests from people wanting to understand particularly why their ancestor, their relative might have been received one rather than the other. And we often can't say. That's why we're seeking this, suggesting that it might be as an outcome of this inquiry. It might be very helpful for us for there to be a distinction between combat gallantry and distinguished leadership awards. It has evolved over time. There was clearly, just as the testimony that we just heard, where the Chiefs of Staff Committee were considering this back in 2007, there was clearly an issue about trying to understand and unpack the difference between, leadership in action and almost command in theatre. And that would certainly be helpful to us, Nick. I'm just looking at you. This is my sort of historical expert in terms of the evolution of the Australian awards. But for us, what we're seeking really is just to help people understand the nature of that service and sacrifice. Often the only thing that families and friends and relatives have to go by is the recognition, the metallic recognition they wear or they don't. Often we have people who say, I can find a citation sort of scratched in a battalion commander's notebook from the Second World War, but we can see that nothing came of that. Can you help us understand why? And we can't, because there's no clarity. And certainly I'd hope that from this point going forward for us, in future wars, or certainly in understanding the most recent wars in which we've been engaged, I'd love to be able to draw on the citations that have been considered for awards, so that we can give families and friends a more detailed understanding of that service, but also the recognition that the men and women who have earned these awards are due in our place of national commemoration. But in terms of the evolution, I'll throw to Nick. In terms of the evolution from the Imperial Honours to us and where the point of divergence came.
I'm not sure that I've quite grasped the question, Senator. Obviously, one of the big topics of discussion here, and something which Rear Admiral Boulton's made very clear, is that our system of honours and awards, the Australian system of honours and awards, is a comparatively youthful one. It's not been around for terribly long, and we're still finding our feet in many ways. As we've said in our submission, we've not at this stage committed an Australian force of significant size, and by significant size we would probably mean divisional level or higher, to a conflict, which means we haven't been in a position where we needed or had the authority to grant a large number of awards of any kind. And so very much when Afghanistan comes along as our first significant conflict since Vietnam, the ADF is, I think, and I hope they'll excuse me saying so, is seeking as it goes along to work out how this system of honours and awards is going to evolve. it can only evolve through being used. And that's what we are seeing play out effectively, or we're not seeing play out because so little, as the Director has said, because so little in terms of citations and information on what is being awarded and why it is being awarded is filtering through to the general public or even to the Australian War Memorial. It's very, very difficult for people to judge what an award has been granted for, or what is the standard which must be reached to receive that award. And that, again, is not, I think, a matter of fault of anybody's. It's a matter of an immature system which is slowly coming into maturity.
Did you wish to follow up, Senator Cadell?
A similar point.
Please.
Your submission around the fog around, you mentioned that, you know, a Star of Gallantry is close to a VC and a Medal, but there is no published history, no public thing of what level separates these things. Yeah. And that's part of the concern you have going forward, is the actions going forward on that.
Well, it's not so much a concern as I think a recognition that that's the way it has to be. To this date, every Star of Gallantry that has been awarded for a contemporary conflict has been to a Special Forces soldier, which means we have no identity and no detailed citation to tell us what's going on. That means that we can't determine what level of gallantry was required for it. All we can do is work on a subtractive system and say it has to be lower than a Victoria Cross, and it has to be higher than a Medal for Gallantry. That's where it sits. Again, that's not a big problem, but it does mean that even within the ADF, I think there is not quite an understanding yet of what is required to be the recipient of a Star of Gallantry. It's not a widely enough awarded decoration yet for it to have that kind of knowledge.
In your submission, you talk about how none had been given prior to the Middle East at all, and now as you go forward, another thing you mentioned is a concern. How are you currently getting these people you can't talk about, the records you can't talk about? You hold awards and stories of people you can't release because of security. How is that given to you at the moment? When are you told, and how are you told you can tell the story and publish those stories?
Well, that's normally dependent upon us being invited to hold or display the medal.
Right.
So the memorial has no right or claim upon anybody's gallantry awards. So it's incumbent upon either the families or the individual themselves to say, would you be interested in displaying?
But there are restrictions still on even, you have been given stuff and hold stuff, and you would have...
Yes.
Is there a liaison between Defence and museum?
Senator, there is a liaison between Defence and the War Memorial for records management. It's been going on for many, many years. One of the issues that we're facing at the moment, though, is the gazetting of awards once they're approved. Some of the awards, in fact, most of the awards are gazetted. Some of them haven't been formally gazetted in the way that we're used to seeing. And even of the ones that are gazetted will quite often have pseudonyms, redacted initials, abbreviated citations. So there is an issue certainly that I think needs looking at in terms of timeframes and how long a protected identity exists. I think these are open for discussion.
Okay. If I can go back to you now, just you raised, you know, we're politicians, lies, down lies and statistics. You raised the numbers, 58% below senior officer rate for DSC, 42%, that was the 25 out of 58 compared to the 33 out of 58. But those numbers, what are the numbers that served? They weren't in the same ratio of that, were they?
Look, I'm not arguing that the ratios, given 39,000 members deployed, there was a significant number of junior officers and senior officers that received recognition for their superior, meritorious, distinguished leadership in Afghanistan. But I think the Australian public would expect that we do send the best leaders over to lead our troops in conflict. So I think it shouldn't be a surprise.
42% going to senior officers. There wasn't anywhere near 42% of the 39,000 being senior officers, were there? It would have been in single figures.
Look,
I think it's 1.3%.
So 1.3% of those deployed got 42% of the awards in the DSC.
Or 42% of the DSCs,
the same figures could be pulled for senior enlisted, senior NCO ranks having higher numbers. I think it's because of the leadership, the command responsibilities that are on those people, the command pressure that we put on people these days in modern conflict is enormous. There's a risk management of the operations, there's reviewing risk profiles, there's knowing what mission is worth pushing hard and losing people for. It's an incredible pressure.
And I get the stress of work, but in the early 2000s, I was in Dubai for a while. I sat at Defence Force Roundabout. I went to shisha houses and drank sweet tea and played backgammon.
Yeah.
You know, my greatest fear was a Shamal coming in and the air conditioning going off for an hour and a half. It is a different threat matrix than being in country, isn't it?
Senator, if the assertion there is being
that's not DSC. I get DSC
in country, and if this is going back to our favourite topic, the General was in the theatre for 112 days. It represents over a third of the deployment that he was the CJTF 633.
But aren't we merging? I think it even comes into some of the War Memorials comment where we're wondering how the MG, the SG fits comparatively with DSO or DSC, DCM, you know, these sorts of things. There are different levels. And are we merging gallantry with service? Is that what we're getting to across some of these awards? There is a blurring of that line. And I love the line this morning of what good looks like in combat versus what good looks like in service. Are we blurring those things?
For the gallantry awards, Senator, I don't agree.
Not at all,
I don't think that there is a blurring at all.
In the DCMs and stuff like DCSs, DCMs, are we blurring that? Are we lending some gallantry edge to those things which are really service awards?
Senator, you asked in your question if we were diminishing or watering down the gallantry awards.
Yep.
And my evidence is no, we're not.
Okay. I don't think... Potentially I asked that wrong. I think it's the right answer to the question I asked. If we are implying a form of gallantry or bravery for the DCS and DCMs, is that lowering the difference between the gallantry awards, which are well earned, seriously earned, are they becoming too close?
Senator, could I take an example of the Star of Gallantry? Star of Gallantry is awarded only for acts of great heroism or conspicuous gallantry in actions in circumstances of great peril. May I go to the Distinguished Service Cross as a cross-reference is awarded for distinguished command and leadership in warlike operations.
Yep.
I think the difference here is the command and the leadership versus the gallant actions. We don't want to detract from the gallant actions. There was a comment that was raised earlier today about the theatre. The theatre is an interesting concept in modern warfare when we're operating on the ground, under the water, on the water, in space. We've got remote operators thousands of miles away delivering lethal effects.
Last question, just following up something from Senator Fawcett. He was going through that specific case where it appears the nominee had changed and the narrative had changed over time for an application. Has Defence Force, to your knowledge, and I think you'll have to take this on notice, ever disciplined or investigated someone for replacing a nominee on a narrative?
I'm unaware, Senator.
Have they ever investigated where things have been changed without permission or knowledge?
Senator, I'm unaware.
Could you take that on notice and ask that question?
Certainly.
Because it's a real concern to me that someone would change a nominee to cut someone out of the proposed communication chain. It's a real concern. If I did that to someone here, if I took someone out of a chain here, that's, I'd say, bordering on fraudulent. And we had a specific allegation today, and I'd like to know if ever, I know you said you didn't know that specific case, so we have never heard of a disciplinary action issued over the handling internally of a nomination.
Certainly take that on notice.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Chair.
Admiral, I just had two questions, but I think just to finish on Senator Cadell's line of questioning, the Australian War Memorial, and I think the sentiment of a lot of the people we've heard today, or the source of their frustrations, I think partly arises from a lack of certainty regarding the purpose of the DSC, which the War Memorial refers to. And the War Memorial, and I quote them here, it is unclear whether the award is to be granted for excellence in the planning and conduct of operations or for gallantry in the execution of those operations, or both. Now, it seems from the pattern of their awards, and this is perfectly fine, it seems to be largely for the former, excellence in the planning and conduct of operations, because it disproportionately goes to senior officers, which might be the intent. But perhaps making clearer that distinction to the public, the purpose and the criteria and the likely eligible categories for those might be a worthwhile consideration. But I'll just submit that for your consideration. I just wanted to turn to a different topic. In your submission, you refer to potential legislative reform and changes to Part 8C of the Defence Act 1903, which would introduce some changes to the operation of the tribunal. What is the status of those proposals? Is that Defence's view? Has that been a subject of a ministerial submission? Has a minister approved it? Has it gone to Cabinet? Has government drafted legislation? Where is that up to?
Covered legislation?
Thank you, Senator. I might answer this question. Yes, Defence is of the view that some reform to refine the scope would be in line with modernising the Act, and the conduct of that has been subject to ministerial discussions. We've discussed it with the tribunal, and the initial consultation on some policy ideas have been shared with some members of the veteran community. And whilst no, it has not gone to Cabinet, it has not proceeded to that position. It's still in its infancy in the state that it's not agreed.
So you're still in a consultation phase, would that be correct?
Correct.
Okay, good. Because I don't know if you've seen, there is a second submission for the Defence Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal that flags some concerns about your proposals. So I just would urge you to make sure you're familiar with those and take those considerations into account.
Thank you, Senator.
I had no further questions. We will. Yeah, we will. But if we could wrap this up in the next 5 minutes, we'll get to the next witness, Senator Roberts.
Mr. Boulton, coming back to Annex C in your submission, column DSC, Distinguished Service Cross.
Yes, Senator.
Could you tell me what the difference is between the generals, the lieutenant generals, major generals, brigadiers, colonel, and the rest?
In terms of numbers of awards?
No, just in terms of why the distinction, having a subtotal under those five ranks?
Yeah, certainly. So it's broken down into senior officers and others. There's two definitions of senior officer that are commonly used in defence. One is under the Defence Act, which it covers down to, in army ranks, down to brigadier, and then a commonly used definition of senior officer in defence is down to colonel. So it's just an extension of one officer.
So in Afghanistan, I understand it was a lot of patrol work. It depends on the troops themselves. Would it be more appropriate to draw the line there at captain, just above captain? Who goes on patrol? Do majors go on patrol? Do lieutenant colonels go on patrol?
Senator, I don't think the intent of the award is limited to patrols. I haven't seen a definition that limits to patrols.
No, I'm just wondering who's in the actual fighting.
Distinguished command and leadership. And I think the actual fighting would certainly be elements of command and leadership in leading fighting formations. Defence supports that. The acts of gallantry, which are the most likely to be seen in those particular types of units, in direct contact with the enemy, I think is recognised through the overwhelming weight of the gallantry awards that are given to those brave young soldiers that deserve them.
So coming back to my question, lieutenant colonels, do they go on patrol?
A lieutenant colonel would be at the command level of some of the special forces elements that were over there and some of the reconstruction task forces that were over there. I don't have first-hand knowledge. I can back up my statement out of session, but I would anticipate that those commanders at times would go on patrol with their patrols.
So who would be most commonly on patrol? Would it be a captain, lieutenant? Surely they'd be involved. The major or lieutenant colonel?
As a general rule, Senator, those that would do most of the patrolling would be senior NCOs and very junior officers at the lieutenant captain level.
Okay, so it is appropriate, given my ignorance of the actual ranks, I drew a line across just above captain. So when I do that, the total for Distinguished Service Cross to the top subtotal, the seniors and the middle officers, is 56. The total for below is 2. And then I wonder about the ratio in terms of numbers above captain and numbers of people captain and below.
Senator, I think the answer to that question is in the definition of the award, which is command and leadership. So you would expect that the more senior elements in those locations would be awarded the awards for command and leadership. There are obviously some exceptions there for very special junior people.
Okay, final question, Chair.
Yes, sir.
Someone's asking me this question. If there is no definition for inaction, why do we have 2 terms for those who die in active service? Killed in action and killed in active service. What's the theme that runs through it? Is there a theme that runs through it?
Senator, I'd have to take that on notice, and I'll get you an answer on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Roberts, and thank you to Rear Admiral Boulton, Mr Anderson and your colleagues from the Department of Defence and the Australian War Memorial for your appearance today, your service and your submission in advance of this hearing.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.